Hello, everyone. We are now going to be speaking about homosexuality, again, homosexual relationships. But just as with the other reading by Levin, we weren't talking only about homosexuality, but also asking the bigger question, the wider or broader question of what's the relationship between biology or nature and ethics. Specifically, is there any natural or biological component to what's good or bad in terms of sexuality? So today we're talking about homosexuality again because it's an interesting issue, it's a hot button issue today, but also because it'll help us ask another set of questions about ourselves, about each one of you. You'll be able to ask yourself a question about what makes a relationship a good relationship. Whether you're gay, straight, not sure, both, you'll be able to reflect a bit more on what you think makes a good relationship a good relationship. Now, I think it's always valuable to ask these sort of questions. I'm just sort of a curious person, and I like to ask why, or what's the definition of a real blank, in this case, a real good relationship. Some of you, though, may not find it quite as interesting, so let me give you some reasons why it still might matter. So, I'm not here to tell you what makes a good relationship good, okay? Corvino will float his own answers to what he thinks makes a good relationship good and worthwhile. The thing is, though, this will sound a little strange the way I'm going to put it bluntly, but I don't care if you agree with Corvino or not, right? He's not the boss of your life, right? And I'm not the boss of your life. My job is not to tell you what your values ought to be. But I am your philosophy teacher, and so what I am allowed to make you do is to make you reflect on your own life and ask yourself similar questions as the reading asks, but instead of asking what Corvino thinks makes a good relationship worthwhile, you're going to ask yourself what you think makes a relationship worthwhile. Now, of course, we have to know what Corvino says. It'll be sort of a tool that we use in order to ask ourselves a similar question. It'll be sort of an opportunity and a request put to us that forces us to think. But as I said, that we do want to understand what he thinks as a tool to ask ourselves the same question. But it's not like you have to agree with him or any of the other readings we've done. So one of the things that Corvino will draw out most vividly, even though he only discusses it for a little bit, is what is the value of having children? Now, this is a crucial question to ask yourself. Because I think a lot of people know since the time they're little kids that they want to have a family and children someday, but they don't know why. So, something which is about as important as anything else you'll do in your life, the decision to have children, or if it wasn't a decision, the actual act of raising them, a lot of people don't even know why they think it's good going into it. Imagine if you went to college and someone said, well, why are you going to college? And you said, oh, I've just always wanted to go to college. They'd probably say, wait, you're going to spend 4 years and you're going to pay out the nose for it to do something just because it's something you feel like you've always wanted to do. You don't know why it's good. You don't know the way to get the best experience out of college. You're just going to do it and not think about what a good way to do it would be, but just do it however it comes naturally. It sounds sort of crazy, right? So this is something that ethics and philosophy in general is good for. Not for telling you how you ought to think and behave, but giving you resources by which you can sort of interrogate yourself. Ask yourself questions. So that when you have to deal with something like an ill family member who wants to have the doctor help them commit suicide, maybe that'll even be you someday. When you've got a decision of whether to stay in a relationship or try to fix it and work it out, whether you should have children with this person or children with somebody else or no children at all, if you haven't reflected on why you want those things, you may not make the decision which is the best decision for you. Once more, I'm not trying to get you to make the decision that I would make, but I'm trying to get you to think and plan enough that when the time comes, you'll do what's truly right for you because you'll have thought about what's right for you. Not just what you feel like doing, but what in fact is the best path based on your values. Okay. So that's a setup today. Once more, I wouldn't want someone to think, oh, we're spending all this time on homosexuality. It's just not an issue for me. Wow, this week of class has nothing to offer me. If you've ever thought about having kids, this week is for you. Okay? Okay. So, Corvino's article, as you remember, starts out in this interesting and actually funny way. He says he's going to tell you this true story. Two friends of his, and they were coming back from a party. They're a couple. They're coming back from a party. Their names are Glenn and Stacy, and it starts snowing really heavily on the Brooklyn Bridge, and so traffic sort of stops. You want to be safe, right? So traffic sort of stops, and this couple, they're young, they're in love, and it's romantic, right? With the snow coming down, it's just the two of them, it's quiet. In New York City, you know how rare that is? And it's a romantic moment, so they start making out in the car, right? And Corvino says they're young, they're in love, they're not seeing anybody else. It's not dangerous to make out in the car because traffic is stopped. They're not having sex, so we don't have to get into questions of whether it's unprotected sex or are they ready for sex or anything like that. They're just making out hot and heavy in the car. It's cute. It's romantic, right? And Corvino says this is the kind of moment that for basically all of us we look at, and if it's us in the moment, we go, life is good, right? It's something that deeply is satisfying for us, these sort of experiences. And he says, from the outside, too, people look at it and go, oh, that's cute, it's romantic. I'm not much of a romantic myself, but yeah, the snow and everything, it's cute. And he says, okay, how do you feel about this story? And most of you go either like, whatever, it's neutral, or it's good, it's cute, it's romantic, good for them. And then here comes the funny part. He goes, gotcha, Glenn and Stacy, it's not a guy and a woman, it's two dudes. And then a lot of people's reaction changes from, oh, this is neutral, or it's good, to, ew, gross. Okay? Now he says, they're just kissing. Why about this are people grossed out? Why are some people disgusted by this? Or, a little more specific to our class, why would some people say what happened in that car was morally wrong? And then if it were Glenn and Stacy as a man and a woman, they would say it's morally correct or at least morally neutral. So, the way he'll put it as sort of a philosopher, the technical terms that he'll use are things like, what is the morally relevant difference between a woman and a man kissing and two men kissing? What are the salient features? Salient just means relevant or important, the features which jump out at you. What are the salient features that differentiate and separate one kind of kiss from another? And if the kiss doesn't bother you, but gay sex versus straight sex has a moral difference for you, you can shift it to that if you want. Okay? So what he does to answer that question, he says, if there's going to be some morally relevant difference, then maybe we can say that one kind of relationship, homosexual, is less valuable or bad, and that another kind, straight relationships, heterosexual, are valuable or better. He says, but if we can't find any morally relevant difference, then there's no moral difference. They're both good. So then his next step is to figure out why good relationships in general are good. What about relationships makes us typically say, this is the good life. This is what makes life worth living. Okay? So now I want you to pause the recording and answer this for yourself. As I told you, we're going to learn what Corvino says. But the real point is to use what he says as a tool to sort of discover ourselves more effectively. So, before we get into what he said, pause the recording now and tell me, what to you makes relationships good? I'm not going to say more because I don't want to sort of load your answers in the direction of things I list off. Okay? So I'll just rephrase the question a few different ways. What about relationships makes them good? Or another way to think about this is, what has to be part of a relationship for it to be good? Right? What sort of things, if missing, would make you say, yeah, I don't really belong in this relationship anymore. It's no longer a good relationship. Okay, so pause the recording now and answer that. Why is love good? Why are romantic relationships good? Okay, now that you've put down your own ideas, I asked the question generally, but I want to say that one of the methods that philosophers use to get at things, to get at the heart of things, and really help themselves make better decisions in the future, is that we'd actually want to ask the question really specifically. So one of the ways to ask this specifically is to say, make a list of all the features that are necessary for a relationship to be good. Okay? So this is different than the very general question I asked you, which is, oh, why is it good? The way that Corvino goes about it is to ask, what is the list of requirements or the sort of, boxes you'd have to check, where he says all of them have to be present for a relationship to be good. Okay, so there's a difference between just listing things that are good in a relationship, like, I guess I would like it if my significant other had a whack ton of money. That would be cool. But if I'm with someone who's got a regular amount of money, I'm not going to say, oh, something's missing from this relationship, I have to leave. So I want you to understand this, or else you won't see what Corvino's saying. The list we're about to go through is a list of necessary features to qualify a relationship as good. They're all necessary, meaning they're required, which means he thinks if any one of them is missing, then the relationship is sort of fatally flawed. Right? So having one of these basically will not be enough to qualify a relationship as good. You'll see that in the first criteria. Okay? And also having some of them but not the others is going to say that the relationship is bad. Right? So think about it sort of like a sports team, right? You can't just have a good player to have a basketball team be good. It's required, it's necessary to have 5 players on the court at once. And they have different positions, right? The center does different things than the guard. If you're not into basketball, sub whatever sport, you know the different positions at. So they're all different things, but they're all required. You can't have just a great point guard and expect to win the game. Now, the reason I say that is partly to show you how logic works. It's a very different thing to say, here are 4 good things about relationships. That's a very different claim than saying all 4 of these things need to be present for us to define a relationship as a good relationship. Okay? I'm also pointing that out because, as we will speak about in a moment, children are not on this list. That is, Corvino thinks that the things that are required to make a relationship good don't include children. Now, that doesn't mean that children ruin a relationship. It doesn't mean that children have no part in improving the goodness of a relationship. He leaves those things open for us to figure out. But for sure, he thinks that if you have these 4 things and you do not have children, you still have a good relationship. We'll get to it in a moment, but hopefully you see the logical implication here is that homosexuals can have all 4 of these things just as easily as straight people. They can't have children, but since children aren't required for a relationship to be good, gay relationships are just as equally as good as straight relationships that don't have children. That's where we're going. Okay, so here are the 4 things that Corvino says are absolutely necessary. If any one of these is missing, the relationship has serious problems and is a bad relationship. So he says, first, pleasurable. It's nice to kiss and be kissed. It's nice to have other people around, all that. So he says, pleasure is in itself a good thing. Although, of course, it can have long-term bad effects, but that would be a problem with certain kinds of pleasure, not with pleasure itself. Okay? Now remember, this doesn't mean that so long as you get some physical pleasure out of a relationship, it's a good relationship. You need this plus the other 3. Okay. The second one, and you want to make sure you see how the second and the third one are different, or else again, you're just not you're not thinking about what he's talking about, the details. You're not understanding his real argument. Second, he says physical behavior, so the kissing and hugging in relationships, opens an avenue of communication, allowing people to express their affection in ways that are more expressive than mere words. Okay, so this one's about communication. And the way I like to put this is that if you tell someone you love them, they know you love them. But if you say you love them and you give them a little kiss on the forehead, oh, it's so cute, then they know it more. It communicates your love, the love that already exists. It expresses it or communicates it better. Okay? So this sounds like, but it's different from the third. The third, he says, is that sexual behavior, kissing, hugging, having sex, right, facilitates a deeper connection between the two parties. Physical intimacy manifests but also enhances emotional intimacy. So do you see how that's different from the second one? The second one is about communication, showing how you feel. Kisses show that you care for someone more than words. The third one's not about showing what's already there. It's about increasing, enhancing, and getting closer to the other person. Okay, so the first one is that a kiss says more than words. So, sorry, the second feature. Pleasure's first. Second is about communication. Okay, so the second one about communication is that a kiss says I love you more than the words I love you do. The third one is what we just call catching feelings. Right? You've got a friend. You think they're pretty great. You start making out with them. Right? You start having sex with them. It's this thing people do now, friends with benefits, right? And eventually what often happens, not always, but once you add that physical component, it deepens the emotional component, and you catch feelings, or you start getting emotionally attracted to them. You start falling in love. So that's one way to think about the third. Another is just that it strengthens a bond. It makes more of the attraction than there was before when you start adding kissing and all that to it. Okay. The fourth may also sound like sort of the double negative of the first, but it's also distinct. Okay? The fourth one he says is that there's no relevant negative features. Nobody's forcing the sexual activity on the other person through coercion. There was no risk. We're not talking about unprotected sex. We're not talking about making out while driving. So there's nothing bad or dangerous about the relationship. So I used to find this one a little hard to understand, but I'll give you an example and then I'll show you why it's so important that it's there. Okay? Think about if you have addiction issues. So lots of people struggle with addiction issues. They used to be addicted to opiate painkillers. They used to get blackout drunk all the time and couldn't control themselves. Okay, right? And it's sad, but people deal with it, and they deal with it. Now, if you're in a relationship and you're dealing with addiction issues, and the other person is also an addict, but they're not controlling their addiction issues, that's a bad relationship, right? Because even if you love the person, even if you get pleasure from them, even if you guys mutually express your love and respect for each other, and your physical connection deepens your emotional connection, if they're dragging you back into addiction, even if you love the person, it's sort of a bad or ruined or dangerous relationship, right? So here's another example. What if someone's in an abusive relationship? Again, the sex is good. That's the first quality. And I know that sounds weird, but that's possible. The person that they say, I love you, they kiss, and that expresses it, and they increase their bond over time. But one of them is abusive to the other one. Okay, even though those other three are present, this is why this fourth one matters so much. Even though those other three good things are present, if something is bad enough, separate from those three, it can sort of poison the whole bunch. Right? So, that's why this is a list of 4 things. All of them are necessary for a relationship to be good according to Corvino. And I'd be interested if we could successfully slot some of what you end up saying in the discussion into his 4 categories. I bet most of you won't have said something about the last one, because that's more about bad things to be avoided in a relationship than good things. And I bet a bunch of you did say something like marriage or children, etc., and that doesn't fit in with these 4. But I bet a lot of the other things you've said will fit into one of these 3, the first 3. Okay, so I just wanted you to see the rigor and the precision by which he goes through that. It may seem a little bit fussy, right? Like, why is he spending such time detailing that, yes, having sex while driving a car is dangerous and bad? The whole point is he says that should cover all the ground. That should cover everything that's required for a good relationship. And he deliberately leaves children off that list. So, the question is this: what role do children have in relationships? Are children, in your own opinion, this will be a discussion question, in your own opinion, are children necessary for a relationship to be a good relationship? If children are missing from a relationship, does that make that relationship bad or less than what it should be? Or, here's another option. Maybe children are not necessary for a relationship to be good, so that would definitely agree with what Corvino has said. But maybe you think adding children to a relationship adds another kind of good thing to them. So see, then they wouldn't be required, but it would be better to have them. So maybe, I'm not sure how well this will work. The metaphor just occurred to me. But maybe it's necessary for a basketball team to have 5 people on the court, right? 5 different positions. But it's not necessary to have a coach. You can still play a game without a coach. People do it in public parks all the time. But maybe you'd play even better, right, if you added a coach. So coaches aren't necessary, but they improve the point of basketball if you have one. Okay, that would be another way to look at them. Okay, a third way is that children have no impact whatsoever on a relationship. That children are about something like family, raising a family, and not about whether you love this other person. Now, I know that one may sound a little strange, but it is logically a possible option. And actually, it makes a fair bit of sense. The way you love your children is not like the way you love the person you're in a romantic relationship with. They're very different. Okay? So maybe they just happen to come together often, but they don't actually, one does not improve or otherwise impact the other. And logically, there is one more option. I guess I would half jokingly, half seriously put this forward as a possible option. Children are actually bad for relationships. They disrupt the relationship. They shut down intimacy. They cry a lot. You know, like I said, I'm half joking here. You could say that actually children are a bad thing for relationships. Maybe relationships are better when they lack children. Okay. So again, the question I'm asking you is what role, if any, do children have in the goodness of relationships? Are they an extra bonus? Are they necessary for a relationship to be fulfilled and what it should be? Are they actually a bad thing, like a limitation on relationships? Okay. That's the first part of the question. The second part, a little more general, more about you. Do you want to have children? And if so, why? So that one's simple. I bet you've got ready answers for that. Do you want to have children, yes or no? I suppose maybe or I'm not sure would be an answer. And why? Oh, I just remembered. I always forget this because it's not in the same part of the reading. But on 300, Corvino seems to add a fifth good thing about relationships. This piece is, he doesn't say what he means exactly logically by it. Like, he doesn't say if it's a necessary one, so it should be the fifth on that list of necessary things. He doesn't say if it's just a bonus. But just so you know, there's some kind of good thing that he also lists on 300b, and he says it can be an important source of growth, of personal growth. Okay, and it sort of leads you to be a better person, he says. Okay. Now here's what he says about children, and I sort of like this because as a philosopher, one way to be a philosopher is sort of how Socrates was a philosopher. So he's a very famous philosopher, one of the first in the Western tradition. And he was sort of a curmudgeon, right? He kept asking people, yeah, but why? Yeah, are you sure? People didn't like it much because it made him feel stupid. But he was asking people like generals if they really knew what justice and the meaning of war was. He was asking people like politicians if they really knew what separated the good laws from the bad laws. So he was asking important and tough questions. Not because he wanted to make other people look foolish, but because he wanted to make sure that they were actually doing what was best for them and others. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to play the cranky old man, the curmudgeon, okay, the mean old man, but it's not to make anyone feel bad about their desire to have children. It's one, to explain what Corvino says. Two, to make sure that you go into having children as educated about yourself, as full of self-knowledge and clarity about your own values as possible. That'll probably make you a better parent. It'll probably make you a happier parent. And I'd love for you to be as happy and as good of a parent as possible. Okay. So 300a at the top is where he discusses children. Okay. He says, if you think that sexual activity is valuable solely as a means to produce children. So again, this would be a different position than his. This would say there's one necessary thing that makes a relationship good, or there's one way that sex can be considered good, and that's procreation of children. Then he says that reduces your sexual partner to a baby-making machine. It reduces you and your sexual partner to a baby-making machine. Think about how important love is for a lot of people. If all it came down to was that it was a way of making babies more likely to happen, that really sucks a lot of the love out of love. It actually turns your sexual partner, your lover, it sounds sort of cheesy to say that, but your lover, into a tool to produce some third person who doesn't exist yet. Logically, that's what it would mean. If the only thing that makes sex valuable and marriage and relationships, etc., valuable is that children can come out of it, then actually the person you love isn't what's truly valuable in your relationship, but this other person, the child that you'll make one day. So he seems to be pretty skeptical about that. Children cannot, for him, be the only good thing about relationships. Children cannot be the only thing on the list of necessary goods in relationships. Okay. Okay. Another point that he says, look, some people can't have children. There are some people who are sterile, etc. If the main point of relationships, like if the highest best thing about relationships were that you can eventually have children with that person, you're telling that group of people that their relationship is by its very nature, less good. Now that is not identical, trust me, it's not identical to what Levin said, though it may sound like it. It's not identical to what Levin said, because he didn't talk about children. But it's got that same sort of flavor as what Levin said, right? If you say that relationships are good because they lead to children, you're saying that those that can't, they're just not built that way, that they're built to have less good sexual relationships. Okay. Here's another thing. If children are the primary good about relationships, most people in my class, not all of you, but most of you, your relationships up to this point have all been childless. Not all of you, but most of you. So if, this is a hypothetical that's contrary to fact, we don't believe what we're about to say, but if having children were the main thing that makes relationships good, and if all your relationships up to this point have been childless, then you would never have had a properly good relationship before. Now, you probably think you have had good relationships before, even though they didn't have children. So clearly something else is behind it rather than children. Okay? So those are the main cranky old man points. And what they add up to, at least what I'm saying, it's not 100% certain that Corvino would say this, is that children are not nearly as important to relationships as we think they are. Children might be the future, and you might really want to have children, but that you shouldn't subordinate your relationship to having children. Okay? Now, that's a general life point just to get you to consider. Remember, I'm playing the cranky old man here, basically saying there's no reason to have kids. Relationships shouldn't stumble over having kids. Leave them out. Let the rest of the world populate the world. You don't have a duty to make 2 more people. Oh, the cranky old man, right? The point is to take those thoughts and presumably defeat them, find reasons why they're not that good, of reasons not to have kids, and then you better know why you want to have kids, and you better know how you're going to approach having kids. Okay. So hopefully you can see how all these ideas logically add up together. There are many good things about relationships, 4 at least, maybe 5, that are necessary to have a relationship be good. Children are not a necessary part of relationships. Maybe they make them nice, but they're not required. Therefore, any relationship, whether it has kids or not, whether it has the potential to have kids or not, is equally as good. Sorry, technically what he says is all relationships without children have equal access to being good. Because he's leaving that possibility that children make it better somehow open. So all non-procreative relationships, non-child having relationships, have the same chance of being good. And of course it makes sense, right? Of course 2 lesbians kissing enjoy being kissed in the same way that 2 guys kissing or 1 woman and 1 guy kissing feel. Of course, someone waking up next to someone they love and the person kisses them on the nose and says, I love you, boo, or, whatever cutesy sort of stuff. Of course that feels good equally for all people. So the point is, if you like those things and you can't find some other list of things that you like about relationships, hey, gay people have those the same as anyone else. Another way to put this, there's sayings, right, that, love is love no matter the gender of the person you love. That's the point here. Now, that's a pretty easy point, right? The details were interesting, but if that's the payoff alone, gay relationships are just as good as every straight relationship that doesn't have kids. It's not much of a payoff. So Corvino goes further. Okay? Corvino goes further. Before we get to that, though, I want to quickly, because it's in the middle of the reading, point out how Corvino responds to Levin. Corvino makes a number of responses to Levin, but one is this. Corvino says, organs actually don't have a single function the way that Levin seems to presuppose. So your ears, for instance, we evolved ears so that we could hear predators and communicate as a species, and that led to, decreased mortality and increased food production. Okay, so that's the evolutionary function of ears. But if you use ears to hold up your glasses or to wear earphones, it seems that Levin would have to say that's a misuse of the organs. It'll make you less happy. Doesn't really work that way for human beings. Okay. The more general point that we could take Corvino to be making here is things that are genuinely good for human happiness, the things that really lead to human flourishing, are not entirely dictated by evolution. I mean, just think of it, the earplugs thing, the earbuds. If you like listening to music, what's the evolutionary function that produces pleasure in listening to music? It doesn't appear there is one. Right? So, if there's similar things for love, non-evolutionary goods in love, then a big chunk of Levin's argument gets shaky. Okay? That's sort of a side point, but I think it's sort of interesting the way these two authors intersect with each other. Okay. So, this is page 306b. Going through the rest of the article, and this is important. This is the extra that I just said is the bigger payoff, not just, gay relationships are basically the same as straight relationships that lack children. Straight relationships that lack children are good, therefore gay relationships are good. Okay. So, here's how Corvino ends the article. First, what he says is, remember, what we just said about straight relationships and gay relationships with both of them lacking children. We didn't just say, you have the right to do whatever you want. We said it's actually good. It's objectively good, in general, for all people, when a relationship has these things in it. Not that you're allowed to do whatever you want. You're allowed to have sex if it causes pleasure, increases intimacy, expresses emotional attachment, and has no negative features. He's saying more than just gays are allowed to be gay. He says gay relationships are good. You see how that's different from a lot of people's attitudes, even people who are really tolerant of homosexuality? All tolerance means is that you will allow something. Tolerance only means that you will allow something. You don't want it made illegal. You're not going to try to stop people from doing it. But to say that something is good is a totally different matter. When you say something's good, you say more than just, I won't seek to prevent this. You say, I'd love to see more of this. And that's what Corvino has shown us about relationships. Relationships are not neutral and therefore deserving of toleration. They are good and therefore require, as he says, nurturing and support. So 306b, he says, justice demands that we give all good relationships, straight or gay, the same acceptance, approval, and active support that we currently give to heterosexual relationships. The goods at stake are identical, that list of necessary goods, and the pain that comes from our denying these goods is real. So this is where Corvino gets directly into the issues of gay marriage, gay adoption, etc. Adoption is actually interesting, right? Because kids are sort of this other category for him. Okay. So this is what I want you to understand, and we'll end on this final point. This is why I didn't break up this recording today, because this one's a bit shorter than some of the others. Okay. Is that Corvino says, unless you can find something bad about gay sex, that would count as the fourth, count against the fourth requirement, then you have to treat gay and straight couples the same. And not just treat them the same legally before the law. That would be toleration. But in the same way that you get excited when your cousin marries someone of the opposite sex, you should be excited and supportive when your gay cousin wants to marry someone of the same sex. Now, I know some of you already do that, but I want you to see there's a very different attitude towards merely saying, hey, it's America, you're free to do whatever you want, and to say, oh my God, I'm so excited for you. Imagine if you were if you wanted to get married, and you said to someone, yeah, I'm going to marry so-and-so, my partner I've been with for a while, I'm going to get married, and the person said, hey, it's America, you can do whatever you want. I guess I'll tolerate that. I won't try to get you thrown in jail for that. You'd be a little, is that person going to get invited to the wedding? Heck no. Right? And part of Corvino's point is, imagine if the culture in general says that. Their attitude is, well, I don't see any legal reasons to deny your marriage, I suppose. And then especially if they want to think that that makes them progressive and really liberal and tolerant, you'd probably say, well, thanks for not trying to burn me at the stake. But you're not going on my Christmas list just because you say, well, legally, I'll allow it. And the point isn't, let's be so nice to homosexuals. Corvino's point is, we already do this for straight couples. We celebrate their weddings. We celebrate straight love in general on TV, in movies. I mean, I was really excited when Swizz Beatz and Alicia Keys fell in love. Dramatic story. Don't even get me started. Okay? I thought, these kids, they're in love. Look, that's so cute. Okay? We get excited about relationships in general. But some of us have this reaction to gay relationships where we say, well, it's not my thing. I think maybe it's a little gross, like Glenn and Stacy on the bridge. But I guess it's America. People are allowed to do gross stuff if they want in the privacy of their own homes. But I don't want to have to see it. And Corvino says, if someone said that to you about your straight relationship, if you're straight, you'd say, what is wrong with this person? I'm in love. That's worth positive, active celebration, not mere toleration. Okay? Just one final point. I really am almost done. When people get married, it actually makes them more stable citizens. So this is sort of a sociological point. People who are married, and I mean literally married, not just in stable relationships, they're less likely to get fired from their jobs. They're less likely to have substance abuse issues. They're more likely to report higher levels of happiness. They have greater income because there's usually two incomes in most marriages. So they're better able to buy a house, which increases their overall wealth, etc. So basically, it's good for people to get married. Corvino would say, if it's good, basically we reward marriage, or marriage has built-in supports because it's a good thing, we need to make sure that everyone is able to have access to that same positive foundation, that same useful social institution as everyone else. So it happens quickly at the end, but that's basically Corvino's stance on gay marriage. A, allow gays to get married. B, acknowledge that there's benefits to marriage and it wouldn't be fair to deny those to certain people. The stability, the wealth increase, etc. C, go beyond merely saying it's useful and we should allow it because legally there's no reason not to, and actually celebrate gay marriage just as much as you celebrate straight marriage without children. Okay. So, that is our Corvino reading. If you have any questions, as always, please send me an email and I'll respond right back to it. And I'm looking forward to hearing your comments in the discussion board. Thank you, everyone.